Okay, today is this is the sixth week, or it will be next week, the sixth week, and so we're going to we will tackle chapter six. As interesting as that is, I don't know why I picked this slide to represent self and personality. I guess when you get down to it, you can strip everything else away, and all you have left is yourself and personality. But the reality is that our self and our personality, a lot of times we dress it up in different clothes so that we will, so that other people will see us differently. One of the really curious tests out there is one from the 1960s, and this is called the 20 statements test. The 20 statements test is just questions that ask, "Who am I?" and "I am blank." And you have to write something behind that. I am. Who am I? I am cute. I am tall. I am intelligent. You talk about who you are, and potentially you say, I'm a baseball fan. I'm a member of if you're a Navajo, you probably say, I'm a member of this clan. My grandfather's a member of that clan. My grandmother is a member of this clan. That's probably one of the things you'd say. You might say, I'm a member of the Native American Church. Um, I I am a mother. I am a father. Um, I'm a brother. I'm a, whatever, sister. So a lot of things you could say a lot of things about yourself, and it's a really kind of an interesting test. Now the reality is they only give you a couple minutes to take the test, and they're all open-ended questions, so that it gets really interesting when you look at these. In 1960, Kuhn stated that responses to the 20 questions test should be grouped into five categories: social groups and classifications, that would be all your clans; ideological beliefs, that you said that you were traditional Navajo, that would be an ideological belief; Native American Church, member of the Native American Church; your interests, I'm a baseball fan, especially right now. My team is not only leading in their division, but they're leading in the National League. They're also leading in the major leagues. I'm a San Francisco Giants fan. I've been one forever, and baseball is one of my interests. Now, normally by this time the Giants are are out of the running, I'll look at daily scores, but not thinking toward the future. But this year they've already made the playoffs, and they may win their division. It looks like it's going to be a slugging match between the Giants and the Dodgers. Not that that's important. Anyway, ambitions. I might have said I'd like to be a college professor. I'd like to be a parent, something that you might say when you're young. And then self-evaluations. I'm intelligent. That would be a self-evaluation. And there are the 20 questions, 20 statements test. The 20 statements test is one of the most widely used cross-cultural psychological measures. Americans most often mentioned personal traits, attitudes, and abilities, which accounted for 48% of their self-description. Now you'd think, well, everybody does that, don't they? The answer is no. Just to people in the West, just people from Western cultures, English-speaking people, Scandinavia. These are really the only people that focus on themselves so much. It's almost like we all are suffering from narcissistic personality disorder. What would this lady say about herself? I have a great tan. I have a slender body. I make fishy kissy faces. I don't know anything else she might say. I have great hair. Guess her hair's not that great. When other cultural groups are given the same measure, the results are very much different. The Maasai and the Samburu of Kenya had only 2% of their self-descriptions reflect personal characteristics. 60% of their description encompass their social membership and roles. I'm a member of the Samburu tribe. I protect my flocks. It didn't have anything to do with I'm tall, I'm handsome, that kind of stuff. The Maasai and the Samburu pattern of a greater emphasis on roles and memberships appears in cultures from much of the rest of the world, and these cultural differences are already evident among kindergarten children. Cook Islanders, Malaysians, Chinese, Native Americans, other Africans, Puerto Ricans, Asian Indians, and Japanese. Now, this is a picture of Cook Islanders, so as you can see, they are not the same as everybody else. They look a little bit Asian, but actually they're Polynesian. Uh, and So that's what a Cook Islander looks like if anybody ever asks you. These three individuals are kindergarten students from Cook Island. Cook Island, it's in the Pacific Ocean, of course, and it's really humid. So they have to build everything out of concrete blocks. Really kind of curious. A Danish study by Ma et al. In 2012 looked at functional MRIs when participants were evaluating personal characteristics. The Danish participants showed no difference in their functional MRIs when they considered their social roles and their personal characteristics. Both involve the medial prefrontal cortex, which is typically activated in self-judgments. And this is the prefrontal cortex right here. And let me see. Oh, that's it right there. This is the back of their head. There you go. That's it right there. And that's it right there. Now, what does this mean? Now, Danish are like Americans, are like this. They are Scandinavian. When they think of their personal characteristics, it has to do. It's very similar to their social roles. Their social roles don't take up any other areas of their brain. Social roles? Does that mean I'm a Mason? You know, that kind of thing. When the researchers performed the same functional MRIs on Chinese participants, their medial prefrontal cortex was only activated when they were considering personal characteristics. When the Chinese thought about their social roles, their temporoparietal junction was activated. This is a region that more typically is involved in understanding other people's beliefs. In other words, as far as the Scandinavians and Western man was concerned, their social role and their personal characteristics are the same. But as far as the Chinese were concerned, their personal characteristics are their personal characteristics, and it fires off the prefrontal cortex. But when they start thinking of social roles, they think of what other people think of them. And that's the temporal parietal junction. And this is it right here. It's right above your ear, just behind your ear a little bit. But it's right on. I'm pointing to it. Can't you see? Anyway, that's a temporal parietal junction right there. Ma et al. In 2012 suggest that Chinese participants were more likely thinking about other people's beliefs when they thought about their social roles. What do other people think who I am? Though we are all individuals, humans are also a highly social species. Social interaction is a continuous balancing act between focusing on our differences and seeking our connection with others. This is a picture from Korea. And as you can see, everybody looks alike. And the reason that everybody looks alike is because the artist took his face and he put it on everybody else's face. And that's supposed to say something. I imagine it says that when I look at people, I get myself reflected back at me. Anyway. Marcus and Kitayama first identified the independent view of the self in 1991. Independent individuals experience their identities as largely distinct from their relationships. Independent individuals are self-defining. Their attitudes, their personality traits, their preferences, their opinions, their abilities, individual qualities. So it doesn't really matter what other people think of you. What matters is what you think of yourself. And this is where you get all of these personality traits from, well, all of these mindsets. You get all of these from yourself. The self's experiences are rather stable and does not change much from situation to situation. The independent view of self is experienced as self-contained and exists as a relatively coherent and inviolate entity. Relationships vary and are fluid as individuals tend to be closer to close relations than to distant ones. So you're probably closer to the people that live closer to you than you are to somebody who lives, if you have a relative living in New York or Chicago or Vancouver or whatever, you're probably a lot closer to the people that are close to you physically. Individuals with independent identities still feel much closer to in-group than out-group members. However, they do not view them in fundamentally distinct ways. The main bifurcation is between self and non-self, and both in-group and out-group members are non-selves. So whether you belong to whether you play on a basketball team or not, this is your in-group. You are still different from them, even though you guys are teammates. Marcus and Kitayama in 1991 also identified the interdependent self. The self overlaps quite a bit with an individual's significant relationships. Interdependent individuals are closely connected with others and are not experienced as distinct, unique entities. So we feel that we are part of whatever group we belong to. So since you guys are all Navajos, you feel like you are part of the Navajo Nation. So you can say the word Navajo Nation. And if you're in Albuquerque, you're still part of the Navajo Nation and you feel close to those people, to the people on the Navajo Nation. So if you see somebody in Albuquerque who's a Navajo, you might feel a connection with that person, far more so than if you saw me in Albuquerque. You know, I'm a white guy, so you probably wouldn't see yourself as connected to me, even though I may talk to you. You don't know that guy, but and you know me from all of our lectures. So even though you communicate more with me than you do with this stranger, you probably would still feel more connected to that individual than to me. Not that I'm in Albuquerque. I'm 100. Sorry, I'm 1,300 miles away from Albuquerque. Interdependent entities are grounded in their relationships with others. Relationships come in a variety of forms, and they require people to take on particular roles, such as father, student, friend, lover, daughter, that govern how they feel and behave toward their relationship partners. The identity of the interdependent individual is experienced as somewhat fluid in different situations. Depending on the situation and the role that the person occupies in that situation, the person's experience of their self will vary accordingly. So, a great example of this is that when you're home with your parents, you act like a daughter or a child. You act like a child. You let your mother and father tell you what to do. But when you're with your immediate family, when you're with your spouse and with your children, you don't act that way, but you act like a little kid around your parents. This is so very common. People just don't feel like they're adults when they're around their parents. Relationships with one's in-group members are self-defining for those with interdependent selves. Thus, the people in the in-group assume considerable importance. People do not easily become in-group members, nor do close relationships easily dissipate into out-group relationships. And as you can see, all these Batmen right here, they're really close to each other. They're sitting really close to each other. Nobody's sitting close to Spider-Man. He's way over here. But everybody, all these three Batmen are sitting right on top of one another. And that's because they have created an in-group. This is an in-group of Batmen. In 2007, Zhu, Zhang, Fan, and Han conducted an interesting functional MRI experiment on Western and Chinese participants. They asked the participants whether select trait adjectives characterized themselves or their mothers. Westerners show different regions of the brain activation, suggesting that they represent themselves and their mothers in distinct ways. When the Chinese were evaluating themselves or their mothers, they showed activation patterns in the same regions of for the two tasks, the medial prefrontal cortex, an area linked to self-representations. Now, this is really important because we're going to talk about tiger mothers and how children allow their mothers to browbeat them into success. We've already talked about this to some extent, but this is really kind of curious because Westerners don't, they see themselves as distinct from their mothers, as separated from their mothers. But the Chinese, people who are of Chinese ancestry, they see themselves as the same person as their mothers. Now, this is something that happens to infants until they're about 18 months old. Then they begin to establish a distinct concept of self. But the Chinese don't have that, which is kind of curious. And this may answer a lot of questions as to why the Chinese act one way and Western man acts in a totally different way. Independent selves have a number of close relationships with the members of their in-group. However, these relationships are less self-defining than are the corresponding relationships of those with more interdependent selves. Interdependent selves identify more strongly with their in-group, while independent selves have a more permeable relationship. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about individuals that are independent, like Western men. A lot of times, Westerners don't feel close to anybody, and the reason they don't feel close is because they don't establish these strong in-group relationships. So they may be on a bowling team. So when they're bowling with these guys, they feel close to them, but when they're not with these select individuals, they don't even think about them. That would be an individual or an independent self. An interdependent self would be an individual. Yeah, that's right. So the interdependent self, when they're away from these individuals, they still think a lot about these individuals. They think, well, if I did this, then Charlie will be really upset with me. But an independent self, he doesn't care what Charlie thinks. He only cares about what Charlie thinks when they're out bowling. That's the difference between interdependent and independent. Because in-group relations are so critical for self-definition for people in more interdependent cultures, and because they serve to direct appropriate behaviors, it is especially necessary to identify those with whom one has such significant relationships. And this is what happened this weekend. I went to my 50th college reunion. When I was in college, uh, I was an independent, which meant that I lived in the dormitory. And because all of the fraternities on campus were segregated, all of the black students in the school were all independents. They had to live in the dormitory because they couldn't find any place else to live. Now, I felt really close to all of these black students because we were in the same situation. We were all independents, so we didn't have, that fraternity mindset. But at the same time, we had a really strong connection to one another. And the reason we did is because we were all suffering through the same similar situations, even though, of course, they were African American and they were, this is back in the 1960s. You can do your mathematics and you can see what the situation is. I mean, that was 54 years ago. Yeah, 54 years ago. So, I felt really close to these individuals. Well, the people in the fraternities really didn't understand what was going on. And the reason they didn't understand is because, for one thing, they didn't have any African Americans in their fraternities because they couldn't. And the other thing was the fraternities, we're together and we do all of these things as brothers. And the reality is, of course, that the connection between African Americans and their white brothers who were independent was relatively strong. It wasn't fraternity strong, but it was still fairly strong. And so, that made a huge difference. So when we were talking this weekend, there's only one African American who's still alive, as weird as that is, but we'll talk about that later, I think. It's known as John Henryism, and we're going to talk about that later. But when we were talking about this weekend, the fraternity people, it just went right over their head. They had no clue what was going on because they, African Americans, as far as they were concerned, were different. And how could I feel a close connection to somebody who was so different than I was? But the reality was that we connected as people that were independent and people that were not in the fraternities, and so we had a strong connection with one another, and they couldn't understand that. Obligations to others are an important part of in-group relations among interdependent people. As a matter of fact, I was talking about this weekend, and no one could accept it. I kept saying we didn't do enough for African Americans. We allowed the fraternities to be segregated. We should have done more. I kept saying that, and everybody looked at me like, you must be nuts. You're not black. Why should you care? And it was that kind of a situation. Obligations to others are an important part of in-group relations among interdependent people. So it is of vital importance for them to distinguish those toward whom they have obligations from those they do not. Becoming a member of an interdependent individual's in-group is thus a rather substantial accomplishment, and such relationships should be entered cautiously. A more independent person is likely to perceive themselves as existing and functioning separately from the social environment. The environment is more tangential to the independent person's identity. Relationships can be formed and broken without having a large impact on the independent person's identity because they can form many different relationships. But people that are interdependent, they are close to a small group of individuals. An independent person can be relatively close to a lot of different individuals, but an interdependent person, they can't. They can't. And that was one of the things that people didn't understand this past weekend. People with independent selves are more willing to form new relationships, maintain larger networks of relationships, and be less distressed should any of these relationships fade away over time. For independent persons, in-groups and out-groups are less consequential to self-construction. And of course, people die. It's not that big a deal. If somebody's is an independent-minded person, they're not really close to very many people. There is convergent evidence of heightened distinction between in-groups and out-groups among those who are more interdependent. Collectivistic cultures, such as the Japanese, richly describe this pronounced difference in behavior between contexts involving in-groups, which are known as uchi, and those involving out-groups, and those are known as soto. So you have uchi and you have soto. Your uchi are the people that look like you. This is Sailor Moon. That's who this is. They're all dressed up like Sailor Moon. Okay, so their in-group are the uchi. This is their uchi, the Sailor Moon uchi. And anybody who dresses differently is a soto. Studies have found that Asian Americans were more accurate than European Americans in identifying the emotions experienced by their close friends. European Americans were more accurate than Asian Americans in identifying the emotions that were experienced by strangers. And this is Ma Kellums and Blaskovich in 1912 from research by them. Really kind of interesting if you think about it, because European Americans more independent-minded, therefore they're more able to identify a person that they don't know, and not very good at identifying their in-group. But the Asian Americans, they are very good at identifying their in-group, but they don't really care about strangers. They don't really care about people that are in the Soto, in the out-group. In places like Japan, where commitment to in-group members is strong, there should be less of a willingness to cooperate with outgoing members. People with interdependent selves focus their trust on people they share some kind of relationship. Yamagishi and Yamagishi in 1994 found that Americans tend to have higher levels of general trust than the Japanese do because the Japanese are interdependent. So they have trust in people that they are close to. They're in group, they're uchi. But Americans, we are more independent, and therefore we have small relationships with a lot of different people, so we're more likely to trust those people. Bond and Smith in 1996 found that people with more interdependent views of self are more likely to conform than those with more independent views. This may be because people with more interdependent selves view in-group members as an extension of themselves while maintaining distance from out-group members. Now it's really kind of interesting because the Japanese were an isolated country for an extended length of time, and then the American Navy forced them to open up their ports. So the first Americans that they saw as hairy monsters, and this is a drawing of an American that a Japanese artist did, and as you can see, this guy's got an awful lot of hair. It looks almost like his eyebrows are growing into his hair. And he's got hair growing out of his neck. Yeah, he looks pretty much like a monster, as interesting as that is. That's how they see Americans. They see, well, not just Americans, they see anybody who isn't Japanese as alien, as somebody that's different. And they refer to them as gaijin. Gaijin means foreigner or alien. And it doesn't really matter what race they are. As long as they're not Japanese, then they're gaijin. In 1983, IBM tasked psychologist Gert Hofstede to assess their employees' opinions and interests. Hofstede administered questionnaires to 117,000 employees in 40 different countries. Hofstede was able to map the individualism of all of the employees in each country. The country scores show a clear and striking pattern. Hofstede discovered that the most individualistic country in the world is the United States, closely followed by other English-speaking countries and by Western European nations. Countries that scored high in collectivism were various nations in Latin America and Asia. Other research has found similar results. And of course, this is a picture of Kim Kardashian, I think. She's one of, well, at least she's one of the Kardashians. Collectivism has been found to dominate in Asia, Africa, Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, and the South Pacific. Most people participate in collectivistic cultures where interdependent selves are more common. These countries encompass more than 80% of the world population. And there you go. These are, well, France shouldn't be in there, and Spain shouldn't be in there. Anyway, individualistic versus collectivistic. And as you can see, it's the United States, Canada, the Scandinavian countries, Australia, that's Iceland, that's Great Britain, that's Germany and Austria, and this is the Yugoslavian countries, Switzerland, the Netherlands, that's the Netherlands right there, New Zealand and Australia. Anyway, okay, so collectivistic countries, everybody except the people in yellow. People in yellow only represent 20% of the population, and the other 80% are collectivistic. The state with the highest collectivism score by far was Hawaii, probably because of that state's large population of people with Asian ancestry. The next most collectivistic states were Utah and the states of the Confederate South. The least collectivistic states were in the Mountain West the Great Plains, the Northeast, and the Midwest. This is a picture of Hawaii. That's Diamond Head right there. This is Waikiki Beach. There you go. That's a really old hotel in Hawaii, in Honolulu. Individualism varies as a function of social class. Specifically, people from higher socioeconomic backgrounds tend to have more independent selves than those from poorer backgrounds. Within the same country, wealthier Icelandic children tend to describe themselves more in terms of inner psychological traits than poorer Icelandic children do. Middle-class American parents emphasize the importance of self-direction to their children, whereas working-class American parents place greater value on conforming to authority figures. And this is according to a study from Weininger and LaRue in 2009. This may have something to do with how Donald Trump became president of the United States, because he appealed to the working class people in the United States, and they voted for him. And one of the reasons they may have voted for him is because he was a stronger authority figure than Hillary Clinton in 2016. Interdependent messages are a better fit with American students from a working class background. Some of the highest concentrations of universities in the United States are in the Northeast and the Midwest, where individualism is more pronounced. Psychological research within the United States has been largely conducted with participants who are even more individualistic than most other Americans. This is really kind of curious because I'm from Indiana, and Indiana, of course, is the Midwest. And Indiana has, if you look at, okay, so let's take Arizona, and we'll look at the colleges in Arizona and the colleges in Indiana. The colleges in Arizona, you have NAU, the U of A, and ASU. So you have three major universities. Then how about small colleges, small four-year liberal arts colleges? And the answer is there are zero. There are no liberal arts colleges in Arizona. You have junior colleges, you have tribal colleges, but you don't have any small liberal arts colleges. Indiana has 17 liberal arts colleges. It has three major universities, and it has two mid-majors. It has Indiana University, Purdue, and Notre Dame are the three major universities. The mid-majors has Ball State and Indiana State. I think that's it. And then it has 17 liberal arts colleges. And of course, I went to a liberal arts college. I went to Wabash College, and so it fits into this mold that we're talking about. If we look at New Mexico, does New Mexico have any liberal arts colleges? And the answer is, I think it has one, St. John's. I think it's St. John's. It has one liberal arts college. Texas, how many do they have? They have three liberal arts colleges. So when we're talking about the Midwest, we're talking about a lot of different liberal arts colleges. And most of them are connected to a church. That's not that curious, I guess. They wanted to educate people to become their ministers, in that religion. So Ohio has a lot, Illinois has a lot, Indiana has a lot, Michigan, the same thing, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa has a number of liberal arts colleges. So you can see the mindset, the idea of what education is supposed to look like is very much different in Indiana than it is in Arizona. Other cultural dimensions that researchers have investigated include societal tightness versus looseness. Societal tightness characterizes how strong cultural norms are and how tolerant cultures are of deviant behavior. This predicts level of prevention, focus, impulse control, and self-regulation. And this argument comes up over and over and over again. What should we do to control this type of behavior? What should we do to control the crystal meth problem? What should we do to control thievery? What should we do to control the drug problem, uh, the marketing of drugs? Another cultural dimension that has been investigated are cultural values, values for universalism, benevolence, conformity, tradition, security, power, achievement, hedonism, stimulation, and self-direction. All of these are cultural dimensions that you need to deal with. And if you come from Western culture, of course, it's one thing. But if you come from an Eastern culture, there is a lot of conformity, there is a lot of social control. Other cultural dimensions that have been investigated: power distance, uncertainty avoidance, vertical horizontal social structure, relationship structure, context dependence, social cynicism, and complexity. One of the difficulties in studying cultural psychology is that individuals tend to be varied and complex. Cultures are highly variable and are resistant to categorization. All cultures are highly heterogeneous and contain a great variety of people. Cultural differences, this book describes, reflect general patterns of differences and not all or nothing statements. A number of researchers have identified women as more interdependent than men. The features of independent entities seem more characteristic of men than of women. There are issues of gender equality in most cultures. And of course, if we look at this cartoon, we can see that both of these individuals are appalled by the other woman and their culture and how it controls them. Women represent only about 3% of elected officials in Arab nations. Women represent 45% of the Swedish parliament. In Brazil, 50% of the men and women are literate. In Pakistan, twice as many men are literate as women. In the Netherlands, Germany, and Finland, on the average, people expressed views that men and women should be treated quite similarly. In India, Pakistan, and Nigeria, people tended to believe that roles, obligations, and rights of men and women are clearly different, with men being perceived to have more rights than women. Within a culture, men and women tended to share fairly similar views about gender equality. In India, Pakistan, and Nigeria, women tended to embrace the gender attitudes of their respective countries. In every case except two reversals in Malaysia and Pakistan, males have a significantly more traditional gender view than females, probably because traditional gender views benefit men more than women. And this is an old advertisement. As you can see, she's not only on her knees, but she's serving him breakfast in bed. And that's because it's a man's world, it's a Van Heusen world. Countries in which a large percentage of the population practiced Christianity, in particular Protestantism, were more likely to have egalitarian gender views, whereas countries with a large percentage of Muslims were associated with more traditional gender views. Oddly, more northern countries express more egalitarian views, and more southern countries express more traditional gender views. The more urbanized the country, the more likely the country will have egalitarian views. The country's individualism score correlated positively with egalitarian views. One way to look at gender and culture is to determine which gender identity is viewed to be more essentialized, which gender is thought to reflect an underlying unchangeable essence, which gender has less flexible ways of being expressed in a socially approved way. Americans tend to view male gender identity to be more essentialized than female gender identity. Most Americans do not seem to find it disturbing or unusual for women to present themselves like men, wearing pants, having short hair, not wearing facial makeup, or participating in stereotypically male behavior, girls playing with trucks or girls playing ice hockey. And of course, if we look at this individual, this man wearing a dress, it looks really very strange. We don't even want to see this. It goes against our grain. However, how about this? A woman in a hockey uniform. Is it okay? Sure, it's okay. Is this okay? No, that doesn't fit at all. Many Americans do find it disturbing or unusual for men to present themselves as women, wearing dresses, high heels, or lipstick, or to participate in stereotypically female behaviors, playing with dolls or taking ballet lessons. More identity is less changeable, and thus male identity is less changeable and thus more essentialized. In Hindu myths, many more male gods change into female goddesses than female goddesses change into gods. The Hindu religion involves goddess worship, and many of the most powerful gods are females: Kali, Parvati, Durga, and Maya. According to the Hindu religion, female identity is viewed as pure, strong, and powerful. In India, the male gender identity was more mutable and less essentialized than the female gender. This is what Kali looks like, the many-armed Kali. This is what Parvati looks like. She's the four-armed individual. This is Durga, and this is Maya. Festinger in 1957 proposed that people have a powerful motivation to be consistent, and their cognitive dissonance is the distressing feeling we have when we observe ourselves acting inconsistently. The belief that we can easily change and are expected to change is referred to as an incremental theory of self. Traits are malleable and can be improved. Aspects of the self are largely resistant to change, which is known as an entity theory of self. Individuals with this view see their attributes to be largely inborn, in other words, written in stone or in their DNA. Entity and incremental self theories about intelligence. There are two views children have of intelligence. This is the way my intelligence is, written in stone. No, intelligence will grow and develop, and that is the other idea. Research found that 60% of Chinese high school students said that the key to success in math is to study hard. In contrast, less than 25% of American high school students felt this way. Japanese believe more than Americans that intelligence is based on how hard you try rather than on what you are born with. To get into a good American university, you typically need to get an acceptable score on the SAT. The SAT was originally designed to measure innate aptitudes and not efforts in one's classes. It turns out that studying hard can increase one's SAT score significantly. This has been a source of frustration for the test makers because the tests are no longer serving the function they were originally designed for, which has sparked much policy debate about their utility. IQ tests are regularly given in public schools in the United States, and the results influence decisions on whether students should attend gifted or remedial classes. In Japan, to get into a good university, you need to do well on university entrance exams that test your mastery of a large amount of material. The Japanese bar exam to become a lawyer is notoriously difficult. Only 2.5% of the people pass it every year, and those who do on average have failed the exam 4 times before ultimately succeeding. Approximately 2/3 of those taking the American bar exam each year pass it, with about 3/4 of them passing it on their first attempt. The 5-factor model of personality started as a personality profile test developed to test U.S. Air Force officers in the 1950s by Tupes and Crystal in 1961. And this is Tupes. This is a picture of Tupes. Tupes and Crystal used factor analysis to determine which of Cattell's 16 personality factors were significant. They came up with 5 that factored as most important over and over again. And these are Cattell's 16 personality characteristics: warmth, reasoning, emotional stability, dominance, liveliness, rule consciousness, social boldness, sensitivity, vigilance, abstractedness, privateness, apprehension, openness to change, self-reliance, perfectionism, and tension. Openness to experience reflects a person's intelligence and curiosity about the world. Conscientiousness indicates how responsible and dependable an individual is. Extroversion indicates how much an individual is active and dominant. Agreeableness is the extent to which a person tends to be warm and pleasant. Neuroticism is the degree to which an individual can be seen as emotionally stable and unpredictable. The five-factor model proposes that all personality traits largely reflect some combination of these five core traits. All personality traits should show significant correlations with at least one, if not more, of these core traits. The five factors can be seen to reflect the basic structure of personality. There is a question as to how well the five-factor structure generalizes elsewhere. We know this works in the United States. We know this works in the Western world, but does this work in other places? An analysis of indigenous Chinese personality trait terms found a set of factors that were not the same as the big five. There's a shock for you. Rather, four factors emerged that were captured by the following labels. Let me take a quick drink. Dependability, reflecting responsibility, optimism, and trustworthiness. Interpersonal relatedness, reflecting harmony, thrift, relational orientation, and tradition. Social potency, reflecting leadership, adventurousness, and extroversion. And individualism, reflecting logical orientation, defensiveness, and self-orientation. All of these have to do with being in a collectivist society. They all have to do with interdependentness. Similar approaches have been taken in other cultures. Researchers looking at Filipino personality traits discovered two additional traits to the big five: temperamentalness and a negative valence dimension. Now, this means that in the Philippines, somebody that is in charge should be temperamental. In other words, they should act grouchy toward their subordinates. And the grouchier they are, the more positive it seems to the people that they work for. So if I'm a fairly pleasant person, if I went to the Philippines and I tried to control or I tried to lead a select group of individuals, I would be an abysmal failure because I'm not temperamental. And because of that, and because I wouldn't have the right attitude, the right negative attitude, then I would be seen as weak. In an investigation of 11 different language groups in South Africa revealed 9 underlying factors, some of which overlapped with the big five, but other factors that did not. Now, this is in South Africa, so we're not only dealing with white South Africans, we're also dealing with black South Africans. And the reason this picture is here is because these are all South Africans at the beach. And the two factors that were different from the big five-factor model was integrity and relationship harmony. Some studies in other languages reveal evidence for factors in addition to the big five. Other studies sometimes do not find evidence for all 5 of the big 5 traits. In particular, openness to experience is the trait that emerges the least consistently in studies conducted in other languages. This is a flag of Romania. These are Romanians. Openness to experience has to do with being open-minded and seeking new adventures. In other words, in other cultures, people just want to stay where they are and do what they know best. They don't want to go out and seek new horizons. The north central Great Plains, especially around Minnesota and Wisconsin, is the epicenter for friendly and conventional cluster, as residents are the highest in the country for the traits of extroversion, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. And that's where I live right now. This is Minnesota and Wisconsin. I live right here in Iowa. So this is like the most pleasant place in the United States. The western states from Oregon down to Arizona house the relaxed and creative cluster, where there is the lowest neuroticism and the highest openness to experience. The northeastern states, especially New York and Massachusetts, are home to the temperamental, uninhibited cluster where people score the highest on neuroticism and the lowest on conscientiousness. So if you come to my part of the country, we're pretty friendly people. If you come to this part of the country, not so much. And that's the end of the chapter. It's been fun. I always love cultural psychology. I'll talk to you next week and we'll tackle something else.